soon as he says order arms, you're like, order arms, bring it down to your hand, as fast as possible. Order arms. Mark down.
We're going to post. Well, I have to get posted. We just step back.
National Guard. We're now going to start the ceremony. Please take your seats in theater. Excuse me. Area located near the wings of B-52.
Give them a few seconds to get seated, and then we'll do it. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Would you please take your seats? It's not working. Good morning. That's better. And welcome to the dedication of our atomic cannon. We know it's a little warm out here, but we sure would appreciate it if you folks would bear with us and take your seats now. I'm Joni Heslip, and I'm the museum director. And on behalf of the entire staff, we certainly are pleased that you're with us this morning. Would you all please stand now for the posting of the colors? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. pleasure for me this morning to introduce the Deputy Manager of our parent agency, the Albuquerque Operations Office of the Department of Energy. I'd like to introduce at this time Mr. Jim Culpepper.
Good morning. I'd like to extend my warm welcome to all of you in the warm New Mexico sun. The Department of Energy is very, very pleased and proud to have this National Atomic Museum. And I think some of you know, but you may not, others may not, that last year the Congress passed a bill which made this the National Atomic Museum. And so we're very proud of that. Chairman of our advisory committee, Al Sopp, is here with us, and other members of the committee are here as well. This museum has taken on an additional importance with the kind of changes we've seen in the world. And I think we're making a big effort to try to upgrade the facilities on the inside and the outside, and we finished a new parking lot here, and Joni and her staff, which is part of our Department of Energy staff here in Albuquerque, are doing a great job. We may have a few interruptions this morning with air flyovers. In 1953, the then Atomic Energy Commission detonated an atomic artillery shell in Nevada. Shortly thereafter, there were the first deployment of what you see behind you here, 280 millimeter atomic cannon. And those units remained in service for about 10 years in Europe. And I don't want to steal Colonel Estrada's and some of his thunder, but he's going to give us some more background and history of that. But when I came to Albuquerque about 4 years ago as a deputy manager, I saw this unit setting here, rather rusty, and I was very proud because long time ago, I didn't realize till I sat down last night, over 34 years ago, a young Green second lieutenant reported in to the 867th Field Artillery Battalion, was assigned as a gun commander. And so I felt pretty proud, but I had no idea that I'd become part of the history as quickly as I had. But nevertheless, we found a young man from Texas, Sergeant Johnny Gibson, who was willing to dedicate his time and effort to restoring this artillery piece. And I know you want to take a close look at it after the ceremony, but they've done a beautiful job. It looks very authentic to me. In fact, I must tell you, I don't believe my gun ever looked that good. We couldn't keep it cleaned up, ready for inspection, either IGs or CMIs or anything else. But I do want to recognize Sergeant Johnny Gibson, and please stand up and take a bow. We thank you for all your efforts. You know, if you tried to move one of these 85-foot long pieces of artillery around the small countryside in Germany, what was then West Germany, it was quite a challenge. And to spend time on the German Autobahn at 35 or 40 miles an hour, which we were supposed to go about 25, I think. Between that and going across the German countryside was quite a challenge. Spent a lot of time, these units were deployed along the border for border duty. Spent a lot of time also in Grafenwehr training. Quite a piece of equipment to be associated with. And so I'm particularly pleased and proud to see that the museum has had this piece of artillery, and they found someone like the sergeant who's willing to spend some time and help us keep this piece of history around. I'd like to now introduce to you Colonel Francisco Estrada, who's the deputy commander of the 101st Defense Artillery Brigade of the New Mexico National Guard. Colonel Estrada was commissioned in 1965 and has been the deputy commander since 1990. He's a Vietnam veteran. He and I had a few moments to speak beforehand, and he also spent time in Europe, battery. And so we're very, very pleased and proud to have Colonel Estrada here with us this morning. And welcome, Colonel Estrada.
Mr. Culpepper, Ms. Heslop, distinguished visitors, ladies and gentlemen, it's certainly a pleasure for me to be here this morning. And I recently came from another engagement, and there was a speaker there, and he started by saying that he had been given 10 minutes to give a speech, and there came a voice from the crowd that said, "Why don't you begin from the 9th?" Okay, so I'll try to be short because it's kind of warm out here. But before I start telling you a little about the history of this tremendous weapon that you see behind me, I'd like to tell you a short story that kind of relates into what I'm going to tell you about. And this is a story about, there were 3 bulls that were in this pasture. There was a large bull, a medium-sized bull, and a small bull. And they were very happy in their pasture. The large bull, he owned approximately 100 head of cattle. The medium-sized bull, he owned about 50, and the small one was content with his 25. Well, they were standing there talking one day, and they heard through the grapevine that this other bull was going to be coming into their pasture. And they were just discussing it, and the big bull says, "Well, you know, I'm not going to give that new bull any of my cows." And the middle one says, "Well, I'm not either." And the short one says, "Well, I'm definitely not. I only have 25. Well, the day arrived, and this big 18-wheeler pulled up to the pasture, and it was just rocking back and forth. And it took approximately 12 guys with lassos, and they finally nudged this big bull out of the truck and put him in the pasture. And the big bull looks at the medium-sized bull, and he says, "Well, I think I've changed my mind. I think I'm going to let him have about 50 of my cows." And the medium-sized bull says, "Well, you know, he looks pretty big. I think I'm going to let him have about 25 of mine." And the little bull, they turned over to the little bull, and he's just huffing and puffing and pawing the ground, and his eyes are all red, and it says, they look questioningly and said, "Don't tell us you're going to take him on." And the little bull says, "No, I just want him to know I'm a bull." So there's a moral to this story, and that being big is that you definitely earn the respect, okay? I guess the wind's picking up a little bit. I'd like to tell you a little bit of the history behind the 280 millimeter gun. The history comes, and in particular, I want to tell you about the 2nd Gun Battalion, 38th Artillery, because there were 4 battalions that were activated in the early 50s that were eventually sent to Europe, like Jim Culpepper said. Under the combat arms regimental system adopted by the Army, all regular Army combat units are made members of lower number units having long and honorable service in both peace and war. Thus, the 2nd Gun Battalion of the 38th Field Artillery acquires the historical background, the battle honors, and the insignia of its predecessor in the 38th Artillery Regiment and the 38th Field Artillery. The 38th Artillery Regiment was initially constituted on 5 July 1918 during the First World War at what was then known as Camp Lewis, Washington, now known as Fort Lewis, Washington, California. It only lasted approximately 7 months, and it was assigned to the 13th Infantry Division. Shortly thereafter, on 10 February 1919, it was deactivated. The 38th Field Artillery Battalion was reactivated on 10 October 1940 and was assigned to the 2nd Infantry Division from 1940 to 4 March 1958. The 2nd Gun Battalion of 38th Artillery began its career as a 216th Field Artillery Battalion on 6 January 1943 in California. It was one of 3 105 howitzer battalions that was initially activated to protect the western coast against invasion from the Japanese or the Germans during the Second World War. At that time, the 35th Infantry Division, also known as the Santa Fe Division, which was comprised of the National Guard from Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska, was beginning to activate to go to Germany for the war against the Germans. In less than 1.5 years, on 12 May 1944, the 35th Division shipped out from New York to England. the 216th being part of the 35th Division, as there was a direct support unit of the 320th Infantry Regiment at that time. 1 month after D-Day, the 216th landed on Omaha Beach with a mission of extending the beachhead in Normandy, and it had an immediate objective of St. Lo, which was a Norman city of over 1,900 years old. On 10 July 1944, the battalion fired its first mission on the 35th Division in World War II. Immediately following that, there were 10 days of the hardest fighting any division in Europe ever encountered. And on the 20th of July, St. Lo was cleared of all German enemy. Not long afterwards, the 216th became part of George Patton's army, the Third Army, and it began its glorious march into Germany. On 10 August of 1944, the 320th, as part of the Third Army, received a meritorious unit citation in that the 320th Infantry Regiment, along with the 737th Tank Battalion, rescued another battalion from the 30th Division that had been cut off by the Germans in the offensive. On 27 September, back with the 35th Division, as you can see, these units were moving back and forth very rapidly at that time during the war. It moved back to the 35th Division and set up defensive positions. The defensive ended in November when the Third Army counterattacked and caught the Germans by surprise. On 14 November, the 216th Battalion fired over 1,000 rounds into the town of Norang, where the Germans had heavy concentrations of equipment and personnel. Across the Rohr River, across the Rhine, shelling the Wessel's Pocket, following tanks with the doughboys of the 320th Infantry, the 3rd Battalion, or the battalion shot its way across Germany. After VE Day in 1945, the 216th came to rest in Wellingen, Germany, there to occupy and govern. Within 6 months, however, it was back in the United States and it was inactivated. On April of 1947, the battalion was revived as the 800 Field Artillery Battalion and given to the organized reserves in Louisiana. It didn't last very long, as it was inactivated in 17 October 1950. In November of 52, it was reactivated as a regular Army unit, and again as a 216th, at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to operate the Army's newest and largest field cannon, the 280 millimeter cannon that was coming into the Army inventory at that time. The 216th moved from Fort Sill to Germany on March of 1955. It was assigned to the 7th United States Army and attached to the 36th Artillery Group and V Corps. On 10 July 1958, the 216th Infantry Battalion was inactivated and immediately reactivated as the 2nd Gun Battalion of the 38th Artillery, as we knew it when it was in Germany. Let me tell you a little bit about the 280 millimeter cannon. During the Second World War, the Army voiced a need for a mobile, long-range heavy artillery weapon capable of attacking enemy communication centers, field artillery, and counter-battery fire. They had started experimenting with the big guns early around November of 1944. And what they had come up with was a 240 millimeter gun, which is 9.5 inches across. Now, this gun was experimented with because the United States Army had seen what the German railroad guns could do. Their mobility was very accurate. Their mobility was quick. Their firing was very accurate. So consequently, the Army wanted something comparable to what the Germans had. So they came up with a 240 millimeter gun. At that time, it became apparent that the gun meeting such capabilities could have its firepower greatly enhanced if it could also fire a nuclear artillery round. Well, there was one problem with the 240 millimeter cannon, in that the smallest of the nuclear rounds that were being built at that time were too big. Consequently, the United States Army started experimenting, and they had the barrels rebored of the 240 millimeter to 280 millimeter, which is 11 inches across. In 1952, the largest of the mobile artillery ever constructed in the United States Army was ready. At a cost of approximately $800,000, which is not much in today's comparisons, the first of these guns was ready. On 25 May, as Jim Culpepper here said, They took one of these guns, nicknamed it the Atomic Annie, and placed it at Frenchman's Flat in Nevada and fired the first atomic projectile. This was an Mk9 round that was fired at a range of approximately 7 miles, and it detonated at an altitude of 524 feet. Well, immediately after that Grable shot, as it was known, the Army started deploying these weapon systems to Europe. They finally deployed 4 of these battalions. Each battalion had 3 batteries. Each battery had 2 of these magnificent weapons that they would use and deploy throughout the German countryside. Later, the Mk9 round was utilized up till about 1955 when it was retired, and a new artillery shell, the Mk19, was developed. It had a range of approximately 18.5 miles. This gun could fire that atomic projectile 18.5 miles. It could fire a conventional round approximately 17 miles, and it was a great deterrent in the Cold War. And as we know, it certainly helped to win the Cold War. Over the years, the value of the 280 atomic cannon and the artillery shells it fired diminished appreciably. That was because the new artillery rounds that were being developed at that time were becoming smaller and smaller. Consequently, they were able to fit the 8-inch howitzer and the 155 millimeter howitzer that were more easily deployed, and there was many more of those that were deployed in Europe at the time. Consequently, the quick development of the atomic capability and several smaller calibers made the weapon obsolete. And the last of these weapons came out of Europe approximately middle to late 1963. I'd like to take a few minutes to talk to you about the best army in the world that we have now. Not the 10-foot tall Soviet army that we now realize is probably only about 3 feet 6 inches tall. Not the Israeli Defense Force, which we armed and trained, and not the mother of all armies that was really good against women, children, and 15-year-old Iranian fanatics, but the United States Army. The total army comprised of regulars, guardsmen, and reservists. An army built from the ashes of the post-1970 Vietnam Army that never lost a major engagement, but lost its reputation and pride because of a failed war. For the past 10 years, we soldiers knew that we were back and we were good, but it took the totally one-sided victory in the desert to show the American people and the world just how good we really have become. The best army in the world is a product of several factors all working together and with great dedication. These factors are leaders, equipment, training, caring, and quality young soldiers. In my mind, it starts with the Chief of Staff, the Joint Chiefs of Staff with Colin Powell, and then Secretary of Defense Cheney, who let the commanders do their job out in the field. Officers and NCOs that demanded high standards, reinstated the values, were willing to guide and trust their juniors to them. They loved their country and they loved their army, and they dedicated to make the army what they knew it must be. These leaders were not just regular, but guardsmen and reservists, and have worked hard to ensure that their share of the total army was ready. Over the last 10 years has proven that the trust and respect between the Commander-in-Chief and the Armed Forces is a key ingredient to victory. Somehow we forgot that in the late 1960s and 70s. As far as the equipment is concerned, I'm here to tell you that we have probably the most sophisticated killing machine ever assembled in the history of the world. What this war proved was that the high tech was worth the many dollars, because high tech saves lives. Thank God that Washington expert that wanted to buy a lot of cheap weapons rather than the few high-tech weapons never got into the positions of power. A year or so ago, the question was being asked, what did we get for the many dollars spent on defense in the 80s? What we got, ladies and gentlemen, was 10 to 40,000 fewer Americans killed and wounded in Desert Storm. We would have won the war without high tech because our soldiers are good, but we would have paid a much higher price. Training, today we have the best trained army in the world. We spend many days away from home training in foreign countries, but we need to do that because we need to train the way we're going to fight, and we do that rather well. That was proven during Desert Storm. Caring. Today's soldiers have never been cared better, and their families, when they went to war. The American people set up special army units to take care of all the dependents while they were gone away. As you well know, all of the different organizations contributed dollars to those families that needed the care, and they were certainly cared for, and the soldiers knew that very well. And last but not least, quality soldiers. The bottom line of this great army is great people in it. Bright, quick to learn, ready to work, patriotic, and all volunteers. High tech, no problem. Hard work, they love it and grow as a result of it. You can't give them enough responsibility. They are winners. We practice the slogan, be all that you can be. We are no longer where the nation put those that can't cut it in the civilian world. If you want to be one of us, you better be smart and willing to work. A few weapons I'd like to cover that were used in the Persian Gulf War is that we use many sophisticated weapons over there. The copperhead, I don't know any of you know about it, but it's an artillery round that is laser guided. We used 129 of these copperheads against key targets, key installations, and they hardly ever missed their mark. The 105, 155 8-inch howitzers, we fired over 44,000 rounds in the 100-hour war. The multiple launch rocket system, sophisticated artillery that we now use, moves fast, communicates, fired over 17,000 rounds against key communication centers, artillery, long-range artillery of the Iraqis. Cruise missiles, Tomahawks, I'm sure you saw those being fired from the, not only the ships, but they were fired from the submarines. We fired over 500 of those at a tremendous cost, but they certainly did the job in keeping the Iraqis' heads down. The Hellfire, TOW-2, Maverick missiles, most of you saw those at home on your televisions. You saw the missiles or the weapons going into bunkers through the windows, one-shot kill probability. The ATACMS, a long-range artillery special missile used for high priority targets. We used several of those for the first time. And of course, Patriot, the air defense weapon system that made its mark in the war. As you well know and saw on your televisions, you saw that Patriot killed over 95% of all the Scud missiles that were fired against the American people. Ladies and gentlemen, I leave you with a thought here. We now have an army that is well trained and an army that can go anywhere in the world and win its battles. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colonel Estrada. It takes a lot of folks to make a museum like this operate, and Joni Heslop, as I said earlier, is supported by a fine staff. One of the things that this demonstrates this morning is the work on this particular atomic cannon. Now, I mentioned Sergeant Johnny Gibson from Texas, who was a member of the 38th that led this effort. But I also wanted to ask, are there any other members here today that served in a 280 millimeter? Dave Jackson, I think.
165th Field, Longport.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else? All right, so.
Now I know how Custer felt with all those Indians out there in my hair here. A lot of military people out there loves have a pair of scissors right now, probably. Richard and I worked pretty hard on this thing, but he did most of the work. I just kind of stood around and said, yes, sir. There were three of us that kind of got together and wrote a book on it. And I gave it to Rick to help him with the results that you see right now. Richard, we've got a plaque here that reads, "In appreciation to Richard Ray for your time and dedication in preserving the 280 millimeter cannon, July the 20th, 1992. From the crew members from the 280 millimeter crew members John H. Gibson, Robert D. Fennell, and Dennis Huddleston. Thank you, Richie. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny, and thank you, Rick. He really did a great job, and I certainly appreciate it. Before we retire the colors, I just want to be sure that all of you stick around for refreshments, but also the 3 people that are here that worked on the cannon are going to be interviewed by Dale Sonnenberg for a video that we're going to do that'll be shown in the museum, maybe even daily. So please stick around for that if you can. And now would you all stand to have the colors retired?
Right. Up. Left. Stay. Arm. Up. Down. Stay. Square. Arm. Right. Stay. Forward. Arm.
Again, many thanks to Colonel Estrada and Mr. Culpepper. We appreciate you both being here. We appreciate all of you being here. Thanks certainly to my staff and to each and every one of you out there. Please stay and enjoy refreshments.
What are the odds of somebody showing up with out of nowhere? All people through all day. Knock me over with a feather. I forgot. Huh? But you know. I dug it out. Stuff I should have done in 1960.
Whatever the native generals were going where it came from. They got me in the middle of the night with that battery and I went out there and so
artillery though was, if you look at it, it moved in two directions. You had the base moved to and from, as well as the tube itself. So you had two parts of got so much range in it was quite a weapon.
Let me ask about the reboring. The colonel had mentioned that was rebored from 240 to 280. Is that a reinforcing piece then? In other words, if the barrel is thinner,
No,
that's just to set it on while it's right.
that's just for display purposes, as far as I know.
so in other words, they didn't have to.
Wasn't that, no, what's that?
Our unit never used that.
You didn't have that? I think we did, where, you know, when you got it out of battery all the way, you just put the end of the gun on that.
No, we didn't use that.
And so in other words, when they rebored it, it was of sufficient strength to take care of the other rounds. So
Right.
They didn't have to beef it up with a.
The other thing, Al, was that you could, this thing was so well balanced when it was in battery that you could swing that thing.
Oh, you just crank. It had jacks on the side.
Yeah.
Just jack it up and swing it around.
That's
I mean,
right.
you just.
It was
move,
amazing.
literally, 3 or 4 men just moved this thing around.
It was
Well,
so
if it's balanced,
well
that's all it takes.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really an amazing piece of weapon. The U.S. really had something, and and it's quite impressive when you fire these things. I mean,
When you rode in the B unit back there, you get the feeling that you went wherever it went. You had no control over your life.
Tail end Charlie.
I mean, the big objective was to keep the back end from getting in front of the front end. That was what the sergeant said. He said, just stay behind the front end and you're okay, Dave.
Did you have the feeling, Dave, that you were like a tail gunner on a bear truck?
Something of that order.
you know, there were a number of serious accidents with these. We had one accident where we actually lost, had a crash, and if you notice, you see the the red gas can on the back of that unit. We were moving, and that unit plowed into a truck, and caught that unit on fire, and we lost the driver.
Well, we rolled one over a bridge gate.
Going to place gun crews. Quickly put down your loading tray. Your round would be moved over from your ammunition truck, and you go through the fire mission. And my commands would come through my unit driver, and repeat give the commands, and the gun sergeant through the azimuth, the elevation, the charge. There were four powder charges to this particular charge, and load that, set the round on there, about a 600-pound round, and put it on the tray. The tray would drive the round in. The gun crew members loading the powder charges in and clear them.
Tell me a little bit about what that means.
We deployed generally 6 weeks at a time in border duty in support of other units there in the border, and near Straubing in that area. And you go into position and set up just as if there was going to be some kind of military action. And you usually stay in position for about 6 weeks and then return to and likewise, you go to Grafenbeer, which was the artillery firing each year for 6 weeks of training. So generally, when you went to the nuclear capable rounds, was fired in 1953, Richmond's Flats, and we would fire conventional rounds in practice and training. But to my knowledge, this weapon was never fired against an enemy.
Can you run off a couple stories or one good story about what it was like moving this around? I mean, I spent a little time there. When I look at this thing's incredible. How could you even move this around Europe? Give me a little feeling, like bridges to small roads.
We deployed very difficult. And you had, I usually had a vehicle with fire sirens and red lights and so forth. It got got so tough to navigate the small German villages that we finally, then by 1959 to 60, we had actually Polizei escorts to get us through the towns because we just couldn't get through the towns because people just didn't want to go. And so it endangered the Germans, it endangered the crews of moving vehicles. So very difficult to move around. We had some very tough times. We had some accidents. We had some people hurt. Our unit didn't lose anyone. Other units did. But moving these around what was then West Germany countryside was a challenge.
What's historic video right here, 100 years from now? How is this book going to be looked at? More copies of the book? We've made so many, we've got so many things. What's going to happen with this? Is it going to look at it as like an atomic bomb? Was it deterrent? Was it incorrectly designed?
Artillery pieces in World War II. So the idea for an artillery piece of this size, with this kind of range, and other ways to be more effective and deliver what the Army did in other ways. So, I think this will be looked at 50 or 100 years from now as a very unusual bit of history, a very short-lived bit of history, but nevertheless part of what happened in the 50s and 60s.
But it worked.
It's got an electric lamp system.
Artillery capable shells that
When I was 12 years old.
any nuclear capability that the adversaries had to manage this in terms of range and they had a lot of artillery. The adversaries had a lot of artillery, but they didn't have anything to amount of nuclear capability we could put on target.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Mr. Culpepper, I was gonna show you this. We were in a unit, and this was a brochure that was a NATO demonstration. And I wanted to show you. Oh, is it rejected? It's in multi-language because there was rejection. Now here it had various pieces of things that were displayed, but here are units firing. Here we are. This is crossing the. We used to practice crossing the Rhine River. This was the Donau, which was not our unit. There we are.
I better take a look at it. Maybe yours is alive. I know ours is, but I got my back.
Yeah, we were involved.
Something strange about that. You gotta get a hold of these guys.
I wanted to ask something.
No, we went to Field Summit. Yeah.
Jim, I know you're running, but I want you to meet Byron Dean from Sandia.
Hi.
And this is
Hi,
from
Susan.
Caltech, and they're working with us to
They want to buy
design
this.
some application help. Byron, why don't you tell him quickly and tell what you're doing?
I couldn't do anything to it.